And we appreciate you being here tonight for What's Your Story. Again, I'm Sean Higgins, and this is going to be a fun evening. I think there'll be some fun stories here. Of course, we have Mr. Paul Stanbery. My first question is, do I address you as Mr. or Maestro? What qualifies a maestro?
Call me for lunch, that's all.
What is a maestro anyway? What is the classification? Is that the correct term?
Well, some conductors demand that you call them maestro. I've always felt it kind of an uncomfortable thing to be addressed as maestro. So first of all, we're in the middle of America, and it's an Italian word, and the word means master. So I don't know what I'm supposed to be the master of. But that's been the traditional word that people address the conductor with. And in fact, when I've done guest conducting spots, that's typically what happens. The musicians are so primed into that kind of thing of when they have a question for the conductor, maestro, that's how they get your attention. And
as opposed to, hey, mister, hey,
yeah,
you,
well,
you with the stick.
You, yeah. Oh, nice to have you watch. Didn't know you were watching.
You were paying attention.
That's right. Anyway, you know, when I first started conducting, I felt always so, and I still do feel a little bit uncomfortable when people call me that, but anymore, when I'm walking down the street in Hamilton here, for example, and people say, "Good morning, maestro," or whatever it is, it's kind of the same thing as saying, "Hello, coach." You know, if you see the football coach, that's your coach, and that's a way of identifying.
It's your identity
with them, yeah. And it's their way of saying, "Yeah, you and I are kind of, you know, together. You know, I appreciate you, what you do for a living, and all that kind of thing."
Recognizing what you do.
I don't correct anybody anymore.
And again, what you do, I didn't even get into the introduction with the conductor of the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra. Mainly, you're known for. But a lot of other pieces as well. You have the Youth Symphony. Run down a list of your jobs, your current jobs.
Okay, well, I start out the week and clean all the bathrooms at home. And I promised my wife I would say that one.
Okay, wait a second. Can you put me in for Tuesday?
I know. No, well, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer for the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra. I'm CEO and music director as well. Have a wonderful staff that work with me. And I'm also music director at St. Peter and Chains, where you're a parishioner. Right. Sean, you bring communion up to me every other Sunday, it seems to me. But I'm also a husband and a father and grandfather. We have 6 kids between us, my wife and I, Pat. And we have 7.5 grandbabies. So
one on the way.
Yeah, one of that half is the one that's on the way.
I got it. I can.
That's right.
Now, again, music director of the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra. You have the Ohio Mozart Festival. You're involved with the Great Miami Youth Symphony. You've been associate conductor for the Lima Symphony. The list goes on and on. Of I don't want to say well-traveled. It sounds like you're trying to go somewhere else. But it was just a wealth of experience.
It's just up and down I-75 because I was born in Toledo and went to Bowling Green State University, which is straight down south from Toledo, and went back to Toledo and taught there for a number of years, and wound up here in Cincinnati, in the Cincinnati area, I should say, back in the 80s, and came just a little bit north then here to Hamilton and Fairfield. So it's kind of an I-75 existence.
Okay. Well, let's go back.
And my in-laws live in Dayton, so everything's
right
straight
there.
up and down.
You made that very convenient.
That's right.
Not everybody gets to plan that. Well, let's go back a little bit further. There's a young Paul John Stanbery. How did music become your passion?
Well, I grew up in a relatively musical family. My grandfather, on my father's side, was a metallurgical engineer, self-taught metallurgical engineer.
Wow.
And fought in World War I and so forth, and came out and did a lot of traveling and was in on the development of the Willys Jeep up in Toledo.
Yeah, yeah.
That was part of Grandpa's work. But his wife, my grandmother, was an organist and pianist, and that's how they met and fell in love, because he, in addition to his metallurgical engineering, he was also a very gifted bass baritone, and we used to sing a lot of light opera in the Toledo area. And this one Christmas time, he had a gig to sing "Oh Holy Night" for a gathering, and he needed a pianist, and somebody told him about this really fine, young, good-looking May Plummer, that was her name, May, who could play for him. So they met, and she played for him, and according to her, he gave her a kiss, and she said, once he kissed you, you stayed kissed. That was Grandma's words about Grandpa. But anyway, they had 5 children, and one of those obviously was my dad, and his twin sister, my Aunt Margaret, was also then a pianist and organist, and from the time I was 7 years old, I started piano lessons with Aunt Margaret, and flip-flop back and forth, because Grandma was right in the house there too when I'd go over for lessons, so I'd take one week from her, one from Aunt Margaret, back and forth and so forth. Always listening to a lot of classical music. My grandfather was a voracious reader, and as a consequence, he was always telling us about these stories of conductors, and he loved Toscanini, and he would tell you all about Toscanini and Stokowski. And some of these people he had actually, had experience with, went to concerts and so forth in his lifetime. So there's always a lot of music around.
This environment you grew up in was very musical and very classical oriented.
Right, and my mother's side of the family too, her father was a church organist in Cleveland, so it was kind of on both sides of the family. And I was fortunate enough to grow up I'm Catholic, and my parents happened to buy a home in Toledo in the parish of Rosary Cathedral. Now, if you've ever been in Toledo, or not, if you've never been to Toledo, it's worth the trip, because it's like stepping back into old Europe. It's just a magnificent building with one of the most historic pipe organs in America that exists there today. You could, for example, put the Cathedral of Cincinnati, which is also called St. Peter in Chains, as you know. You could put it inside the Toledo Cathedral and still have room. I mean, it's that enormous. And you think, why Toledo? Who knows? But they just seem to have a strong faith there, and to think that they built the place in the midst of the Great Depression is also incredible, a miraculous thing. But that, I was fortunate to grow up in that parish, and I had a decent singing voice, and so I made it into the boys' choir. We had a choir of 70 boys, and we had 30 men that sang with us, so we had SATB, and so those experiences were very formative to me, and I still, to this day, as I conduct and play the organ even in church on Sunday, I still have in my mind what that magnificent organ sounded like as a kid, and I try to emulate that.
That's why you want to play it so loud. You want to turn it up loud. No, I'm just kidding.
There's no sense having a magnificent organ like our St. Peter's here has without using it. So
you're not going to use it to its full potential.
You betcha. And that's my goal. That's my goal. So those things happened, and sang in the boys' choir, and went to Central Catholic High School. Then after that, which is the big Catholic school in town, and Central had at that time a very, very wide-ranging and high-quality music department, and so I became a part of that. Started to learn the clarinet, out of all things.
That's what I was going to ask. So your first instrument was the
piano and organ and
keyboard,
voice,
and then voice.
Right. And all this time too, I was composing.
Really?
As a kid, I just,
At what age were you composing?
I started probably 10. My first piece was.
Really?
I still have it at home, which I'll keep at home.
Now, and what were you were composing classical? Again, you said your environment was classical. So was this for a string quartet? Was this for a full symphony?
No, it was just a keyboard piece.
And
as I said, I was studying keyboard, piano and organ at the time, so I would write something that I could actually sit there and play. I think somewhere along maybe 7th grade, I got a hold of some some big staff paper, scoring paper, and I started to write for orchestra. I thought that'd be kind of neat, because how do you do that, you know? And I didn't even know where the flute part went and all that kind of stuff. You just kind of discover that as you go. Kind of a self-taught compositional style.
Wow.
So anyway, Central Catholic, I got there. I didn't think I really wanted to sing in the Glee Club much, but I wanted to learn what are these instruments all about. Some of it's from that compositional thing. So they had the ability to, you had the ability at that time to take instrument classes, you know, flute, clarinet, you know, you could take trumpet class, whatever you wanted to do.
This was at the high school?
In high school, right.
Wow.
And this, in the schools, it's the same thing in a lot of cities. The Catholic high schools have no real feeder system. Like, for example, here in Hamilton, all these grade schools feed into the middle school,
sure,
which feeds into the freshman building, into the high school, and so forth. You know, but all of them have, fortunately, beginning classes down there. You know, in the lower level, by the time you get to the high school, you got some, you know, really talented kids with which to work. And it wasn't that way at all in Toledo in the Catholic schools. So you had to pretty much, if you didn't play an instrument and you wanted to learn when you learned it as a freshman, and then by the time you were a sophomore after a year of class, you joined the band, and that's what I did. So I played clarinet, and then I started to begin bassoon lessons my sophomore year, because I heard a recording of what I thought it was a bassoon. I thought it was a pretty neat sound. I wanted to learn to play that. It turned out to be a bass clarinet. I had no idea what I was listening to. But after I got the bassoon, I started playing. This doesn't sound like what I thought it was going to. But I stayed with it, and you know, stayed in high school band and orchestra, and eventually sang in the chorus there as well. And went to Bowling Green, and then for my undergrad work, and was a bassoon major there, and got a little bit of grant money and so forth, but always sang and always did this, that, and the other thing.
Bassoonists?
Yeah, if you tell them you play the viola, the bassoon, or the string bass, they kind of roll out the red carpet for you, because they need those instruments. You know, nobody.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind for the kids.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, that's the big money's in bassoon playing. That's right.
Everybody talks scholarship. Hey,
that's
bassoon.
Right. That's right. That's right.
So at Bowling Green, now all this time, again, you had been composing. You're performing. You're playing. I mean, is this had become now your life's passion, or you said, I still don't know what I want to do, but I like the music?
No, I pretty much knew by the time that I was maybe a freshman in high school that I wanted to be a musician. That was.
Did you want to be a musician? Did you want to be a music teacher?
I wanted to be something within the musical realm. I knew that, you know. And I have to say that even, you know, I've talked to a lot of folks that are very dissatisfied with their job and their career choices and so forth. I still have the same passion for doing this kind of thing as I had when I was 17 years old. I don't know how many people can say that in life in general, you know, but to be at my age, I'm 57, to be at this age and to be able to say that I still love it as much as I did back then when I didn't know anything about it, you know. It's
interesting, obviously, with your passion and your talent, you were able to continue pursuing it, because there's a lot of frustrated musicians out there.
Oh, are you one?
Yeah, I would have loved to go on and play, but the reality was it wasn't in my cards.
Right,
but
right.
You know, the fact that you could continue to do that, you had the drive, the passion, and the talent, composing at 10, playing a variety of instruments, you know, I mean, it is impressive. So you weren't necessarily looking to, I'm going to follow the conductor's path, but you wanted to be something in music, and you pretty much a musician.
Yeah, let me say that conducting always fascinated me, and I like every other aspiring conductor, you spend a certain amount of your time in your bedroom in front of a mirror with the door locked and the stereo on, and you're trying all the gestures out. But you'd be amazed how many things you learn by doing that. You know, you really, one thing you have to get over as a conductor is just the physicality of it, you know, and to know that it takes a tremendous amount of stamina to stand on the podium. I mean, after a big concert like the Tillman concert or the Mozart Festival, I'll go and weigh myself. I'm at least 5 pounds lighter. Really? After the concert, yeah. You sweat that much.
We want to show a video of what you're doing.
Yep.
So, I mean, we see some conductors who are, it seems, bombastic and overly energetic. It's,
right.
You know, and some people that may not be as familiar with what the conductor's doing, after we watch the video, have you explain a little bit what you're telling everybody in an orchestra what to do and what, how it's happening. What are you really doing up there? And we'll also talk about the score. So if you could introduce what you're going to show, and again, we're going to see you in action in conducting. What are we doing?
Well, this is from the most recent Tillman Memorial Concert this past fall. Since it was the 10-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, we decided to get dedicated the entire calendar year to remembering where we were 10 years ago. And so we started the year with the Mozart Requiem at the Mozart Festival in 2011, and that would have been in April. And then we commissioned a brand new piece of music to be played by the orchestra by a living composer called Towers of Storm and Hope by Philip Koplow, which we played last summer. And then we concluded the year at the Tillman concert in October with the Verdi Requiem. Now the Requiem Mass, of course, is the liturgical celebration or commemoration of someone's life when someone has died. The church for centuries has used these prayers to remember them. And there are literally hundreds of versions of the Requiem that have been composed by the great masters over the years. The two which stand out head and shoulders above the rest are the ones by Mozart, which we did in April, and by Verdi, which we did in the fall. So this is the Tillman concert, and it's the most famous part of the Verdi Requiem, the most recognizable part, the Dies Irae section, or at least the beginning of the Dies Irae section, Day of Wrath. And it is really kind of a musical depiction of what happened during the attack of September the 11th. So I'll be quiet and let you just listen.
Powerful, very powerful.
That's the Day of Wrath, can you tell?
Wow.
I must tell you too that some of the performers that you heard there, we had the full symphony, of course, down front. The chorus was made up of our Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony chorale, as well as the Mason Concert Chorale. Mason, Ohio has its own community chorus similar to ours. And then we had, just out of the woodwork came a whole bunch of professional singers out of Cincinnati that heard we were doing this special 9/11 tribute and wanted to be part of the thing. So
wow.
We had about a dozen of them as well. So, and then the 4 main soloists in front. The trumpets, the extra trumpets you hear, we had, I believe, there were 16 of them up in the balcony, which Verdi called for this. He wrote it that way. You know, the Gabriel's trumpets, so to speak, those from Miami University. So those were stereophonically on either side.
Wow! So now I'm getting more chills.
It was quite a sonic moment there, if you remember, in the concert.
I do want to talk more about the symphony itself and the chorale. But first, kind of give us a 101 on conducting. Okay, I'll hand you this as a baton. First off, I shouldn't do it like this because I'm left-handed.
Right,
the baton does not go in the left hand.
Yeah, you have no future as a conductor because you're left-handed.
There you go. That's why I stay on this side of the table.
But it is kind of a universal thing. When you stand in front of an orchestra, they watch your right hand for the tempo. The main job of the conductor is to set the speed of the piece, the tempo. But the real after all the notes are learned and everybody's playing at the right time, the main thing you've got to do is to control the temperature on stage. For example, that you didn't have to do much to Verdi's music to make it intense, because the players were right there, the singers were right there. You have to do a lot to get them there, but the music is so great. But every once in a while in a concert, you can kind of feel the energy lagging just a bit, and you have to create a little air of crisis on stage for people. You have to change the tempo, do something, make them wake up a little bit, just to make sure that they're awake and alive. And the worst thing that can happen to the music making is that it become routine and same old, same old, same old. For example, my biggest criticism of church organists, I'm one too, is they tend to play everything in the same tempo. You go to church on Sunday and just listen to unless you go to St. Peter and Chains here, then it's perfect. But you go to your average church and the organist, no matter what it is they play, it's the same speed, it's the same volume.
Processional, recessional, every hymn in between.
So you don't want that routine. There's nothing more that will kill spontaneous and artistic musical expression than routine, like something you could be mailed in. So beyond setting the tempo and everything like that, when you have that many instruments, that many voices, there are certain times when they need to come in, and hopefully you bring them in.
You're cueing them?
Cueing them, that's right. So the right hand is to keep the tempo mainly, and the left hand is to cue in. Now, the way you cue in, there's a different kind of an attack. That's the starting of a sound you're going to get if you just point at somebody, or if you go like this at them. You get a completely different reaction.
Yeah.
and how much fist do you give? So I tell people there are 1,000 decisions that need to be made at any one split second within the concert. I mean, that's no exaggeration, because just by the flip of the wrist, if you've got everybody right there with you, you can change the way they're about to play their piece. You can't do anything about the notes that they've just played.
Okay.
That's past. Don't worry about that. And that's one thing you have to learn about in conducting, and is if somebody makes a mistake, you can't pull it back in and say, wait a minute, audience, don't pay attention to that, let's just try that again. You only get one shot at it. So, early in my career, that used to bother me. Somebody just made a mistake, I'd let it get to me and stuff, forgetting that there's more music we got to make here, so let it go and move on and make the next thing.
Note. Meanwhile,
that's right.
Moving forward and leaving you behind, or everybody's kind of tapering off.
And I love to talk to football coaches, because they have the same sort of thing. Although they get to, if somebody fumbles or if they get penalized or something, you get another set of plays, they can make it up, and so all is forgiven as long as you win at the end, right? There are no winners and losers. Well, sometimes there are losers. Sometimes the composer loses. Sometimes the audience loses if you don't do everything the way you should in a concert. But football coaches and basketball coaches, athletic coaches in general, and conductors have a lot in common in terms of the kind of psychological games, so to speak, that you play with your charges under you. So to control the temperature of what's going on the stage is your real role as the conductor, just as it is when you watch a football coach to control the temperature on the sideline, for example.
Okay,
to inspire them to go out and give their utmost. There are ways to say it, and there are ways not to.
It's interesting, very interesting, because you figure all your practice on the football field leads up to game day.
Yep.
So there's all that preparation we don't see happens on game day, and then the adrenaline flows and the coach makes it happen there.
Right.
Likewise, you have so much rehearsal together as well as musicians individually.
Right.
And your preparation, all this preparation going up until performance time. The difference being there's no instant replay during a concert, so we can't. Well, actually there is. If PDQ Bach, I think he did something where they threw a flag and they put one of the musicians for hitting a bad note, put him in a penalty box. But that's a different time. So all we see is the end result. Interesting comparison. So leading up to that, as a conductor, first off, let's just talk about the score. I mean, we've seen parodies where you have this piece of music and music's flying everywhere, but you literally have, the first violin part, the second violin part, the first viola part, second viola part, the cello. Do you pick on the bassoon player since you're a bassoon? I mean, you have literally every instrument all the way down. So for the first note that's being played, you cover an entire sheet of page, and then you move on from there.
Keep that up there for a second. So on any page of the conductor's score, you have it in score order, we call it. Flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, French horn, trumpet, trombone, tuba, percussion, harp, strings at the bottom. If you have a chorus, it's written in just above the string part. Okay.
So you have everybody. They only have to look at their own music. You have to look at everybody's music.
Right. You have to stay one measure ahead of them mentally. In their parts. When you're rehearsing, you have to have all their parts in front of you on the score to know if they're playing their notes correctly, at the very basic level. But how else are you going to know when to cue them in, when to show them the fist or whatever it might be?
Your preparation before you even get together with him and play the first note is you literally have to know that piece inside and out before anybody even plays a note.
Absolutely. Just as the football coach has to know how the play is supposed to develop, and the game plan, so to speak.
Right.
The conductor's score is really the game plan for the concert. It's the same, to use an athletic lingo, it's the same idea. It's just that it's been handed to you from some great master composer. It's not, if Woody Hayes were able to walk in and hand you a game plan, you'd probably follow it. Okay. So when Mozart gives me a game plan, I follow it. Same sort of thing.
Now let's talk about the musicians. Again, something that not everybody may realize is that the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra is made up of professional musicians.
That's correct.
So these are folks that are, they are in the union, or they get paid, or they're not someone who, I played sax during when I was in college, so I'm going to hop in the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony. Right.
We do get inquiries every once in a while from someone like that who just wants to play in an orchestra, and so you ask them, well, what's your background? And then, I played a little bit of flute back when I was in the 3rd grade or whatever it might be. And then I have to explain to them what we really are. There are some groups in the area which we refer them to, of course, happily so. A rising tide makes all boats float higher, and so to speak. So to me, it makes sense to keep those folks in the fold.
Encourage all levels.
Yeah. So we have a good relationship, for example, with the Westchester Symphony, which is a purely voluntary organization. It's every once in a while they'll hire a couple of our players as ringers. They'll bring them in just to kind of fill out and do a concert, that kind of thing. But no, our players are all fully compensated, fully paid people. So when you see them on stage there, this concert, for example, was the result for the orchestra of 4 rehearsals, just 4 rehearsals. And the reason we were able to do that is because we hire the best available players that we can. We have a certain stable of players which we use quite a lot. You see a lot of the same faces, everything, but they're only there because they've kind of been seasoned and passed through the gauntlet, so to speak, felt to be worthy of the orchestra. And I have let players go, and some of them played with us for a number of years and everything. And I say, you're just not carrying the water anymore. I'm sorry, nicely, got to do it nicely, but But part of my role is the quality control executive too. You know, I mean, you know, it's a job.
Back to the reference, you get cut from the squad.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. You have to.
You're trying to. There's a certain level you're trying to maintain.
Well, right, and you know, and there are some folks here that work very hard with the organization and with me, and have for years. Dave Ballou, for example. You know, we work very, very hard, almost daily basis, to bring money in for the organization, to make sure that we have this high quality music here, and then to hand those funds over to a player who's not cutting the mustard. You know, I mean, we have a responsibility to our donors to make sure that when they hand us, you know, their hard-earned money, that they're getting the very best product possible.
And this brings up another side, as you're not just in charge of the musicians. Your responsibility is more than just making sure everybody's there for game day and prepare for game day. You are administrator, manager as well, fundraising. What are the other sides of what don't we see?
Well, we have an office down at the Welcome Center here. I have an administrative assistant, Tisha Patton, who does a great job for us. I also have a librarian, Bob Borden, who teaches in the Hamilton schools, who does all the handling of the music files. Now, we've been around since 1951, 60 years of music files. You can imagine, you know, we've purchased a lot of music over the years. So Bob maintains that. He's responsible for ordering and mailing out all the music to the players. We have a policy of mailing it to them at least a month ahead of time, so that and the expectation is that they're going to be home practicing that music, and that when they show up to the first of those 4 rehearsals for a big concert like that, they've already learned the notes. We don't spend, we maybe a little bit of time, but we spend very little time comparatively actually teaching them the notes. I very seldom have to stop for a wrong note. You know, that doesn't mean they're not going to make a mistake from time to time, but it's not because they haven't practiced the notes.
When they show up for that first one, everybody should be prepared to get through the entire piece if we want to.
Which wasn't always the way. I mean, when I first came in 1995, we barely played 1 concert a year at that point in time. Dave, you remember those days, and it was, I think, at the first rehearsal that I saw the orchestra in '95 there. I was kind of surprised. Here they're handing the music out to the players. So that's the first moment that they saw the music, was at that first rehearsal. And so we made some steps to change that, you know, almost immediately. The next time we were going to meet, we weren't going to be handing out the music at the rehearsal. You should be coming prepared already. You know, I've got to prepare. If we're going to pay you to play those notes correctly, we're not going to pay you to learn the notes correctly. You do that at home. Show up here.
I like that. That's very good. And thus, that is the difference. That is why the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra is professional orchestra. And
there's one other person I didn't mention, the other part of our staff, and that is Cynthia Burkhart, who is she's our personnel manager. Takes care of the contracting of all the players. Cynthia's done this for the Middletown Symphony as well as some other organizations, and she knows every player in the Cincinnati region who is a good symphonic musician, a musician with good symphonic chops.
So she's your
so
scout.
To speak. Yeah, well,
using that metaphor again.
And she plays in a number of orchestras. Wonderful violinist. Donzel, her husband, is our concert master.
I know. Yes.
You know Donzel. And so Cynthia keeps lists of who she's played with and so forth, and she and I will meet in the summer and map out the entire year schedule in terms of rehearsals and concerts and who's available, what the instrumentation needs are. For example, the Verdi Requiem, obviously, huge orchestra.
Right.
Takes a lot more to put that on stage, a lot more musicians than the Mozart Festival. Mozart never wrote for an orchestra of that size. His orchestra is more maybe 30, 35 players. Verdi could be 120 if you wanted it to be. You know, we hired, I think we had 75 players for this concert that you just saw on the tube. So that's Cynthia's job, and she does a great job keeping tabs on that and hiring the very best. So we send out a contract to these players in September. Actually, we do it in August now that I think of it. Here are the dates, when are you available, and so forth. But prior to that, we've discussed all of the above and decided, you know, who would be the best one, and then we offer them, based on their availability, a contract. So it's kind of a 3-step process. But we contract the entire year in the summer. So it'll be all the way up through next year's Mozart Festival by the time we finish that.
So you know what musicianship,
right,
as in what instrument, I should say what instrumentation you need
right.
for each program. They sign a contract, so they know, so they're lining up their gigs for the year.
That's right.
So they are committed for this, this, this.
Right.
Their instrument may not be called for with this, but they, so they're also then lining up with other organizations to do.
Right, exactly right. And it's very important because you want to get into the gate as early as possible because they're in demand. The best available players are in demand for, there are about seven orchestras around the Cincinnati region that are similarly developed, I should say, or managed as ours is. And we call them freelance orchestras. And that's beyond the Cincinnati Symphony. You have the Cincinnati Symphony, which has about 110 or so contract players. Okay. Those are full-time jobs for them with benefits and the whole thing. And then there are probably maybe 200 more symphonic quality musicians out there that will just job around. They'll play with us, they'll play with Middletown, Blue Ash, Kentucky, Lebanon, Claremont Philharmonic, and you know, the ballet orchestra downtown. So, you know, those are the musicians that we tend to hire. We do have some CSO, Cincinnati Symphony players that play with us from time to time, but generally speaking, it's amongst those other highly qualified ones. And why are they here? We've got two wonderful music schools right here in our backyard. CCM, which is a world-class organization that churns out musician after musician after musician every year, many of whom just stay right in Cincinnati and they work either as musicians, they're able to get work, or they become something else. They become chiropractors or something else, but they stay with their instrument, you know. Okay. So we were able to hire them. And then Miami University has a very distinguished record of we have a lot of players in our orchestra that went to Miami or have some Miami connection. So we're very blessed to be able to have that here. And so as a consequence, we have a kind of a never-ending supply of talent. And you know, it's the old saw, if you build it, they will come. If you show them the money, the musicians will come, you know. And it is that kind of, that's why the music sounds so good, by the way. And that's why we do so much work up front with fundraising. It makes it all worth it when you hear something like that. There are cities that are much, much larger than ours here in Hamilton, and even encompassing the Fairfield area too. Much larger cities that don't have organizations that play at this level, you know, that wish they did, you know. And people ask me that all the time, you know, when we're in conversation. How do you do that? And it's because we have such committed folks in the community, you know, like, you know, Dave and Ernst and other folks that just believe in the orchestra, believe in me, of course, for which I'm eternally grateful. But because we have that commitment here and the fabulous board that we have, it's going to stay here. It's something that took a long time birthing to get it here.
Now you've been involved with a number of symphonies, including building symphonies in this area. Right. Blue Ash being one. Is that correct? That's right.
Yeah, Blue Ash started. I was in Cincinnati as music director at All Saints Church, which is in the Kenwood, Montgomery area, right next door to Moeller High School. Everybody knows Moeller from Jerry Faust years and Jerry Faust fame, who is a wonderful man, by the way. He wasn't there at Moeller when I was working at All Saints next door. He's already at Notre Dame, but he'd come back regularly and went out of his way to make everybody he's one of those people, Sean, I'm sure you've met people like this before, that when you're talking to him, even for the first time, they make you feel like you're the only person in the world, you know? It's just that kind of
make you feel special.
Absolutely. Just to
have a conversation.
Great guy. But anyway, that's where I was for 19 years. And you know, going back to the Bowling Green years, I became, by the time I was a senior at Bowling Green, the assistant conductor of the university orchestra. And by that point in time in my life, I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do, was to be on that podium. Now, having said that, I also went back for graduate school and studied voice. I'm a singer too, and
yes, we hear you in church also,
you know, did some opera, and for a time I was kind of headed down the operatic path as well. I was studying voice and winning some opera competitions. I was one of the regional winners for the Metropolitan Opera auditions, for example, which took place in I believe it was Cleveland, for that district up there. But you know, you have to make a choice in life and everything. And at that point in time, even though I probably could have pursued it, I had 3 little kids. I mean, really little ones. And you don't, you know, when you're starting out in opera, nobody starts out as Pavarotti. You start out, right? You know, you got to sing in Peoria or someplace like that.
You got to chase it a little bit.
Yeah, you can't do that. And all with little kids, and plus, you know, any of your rehearsals are not like the big opera companies. They're all at nighttime and right at their prime time when you've got to be home as a dad and everything. So, but conducting, I thought, you know, I can still use this operatic experience, because by the time I get into the pit of an opera house and I'm conducting, I will know how it felt to be on the stage.
Sure.
And what's required of a conductor. What did I really want from my conductor when I was
doing operatic roles? What were you looking for? What were you expecting, or what didn't?
Exactly. But I sang with some pretty fabulous singers. Robert Merrill, amongst some of the folks that I remember we were doing Carmen up in Toledo, and he was one of those guys that would show up kind of late into the rehearsal schedule during the week. You know, he was in his 70s at that point in time, had nothing to prove anymore. Right. One of the great voices of the century, and I can remember I knew he was going to be with us that evening, and I was just singing in the chorus with the Toledo Opera, and we're waiting to come on stage. The chorus was waiting to come on, and in my left ear, singing along in the with the chorus parts, there's this huge, magnificent sound that's practically making my ear melt. It's so loud and rich and everything. I thought, geez Louise, who joined the chorus? And I turned, and it's Robert Merrill standing there singing. Oh, geez. Funny story about that. You know, he did show up kind of late into the rehearsal, maybe 4 days before the show was to go on stage, and as soon, even at that age, he was flirting with every woman in the cast and the crew. If you had a skirt on, he would seek you out. You know, because he could. He's just charming. You know, and a real cute little old man by that point now. But oh, what a flirt! You know, and everything. Until Thursday night of the week, his wife showed up to the rehearsals.
And he's straight as an arrow.
She sat there. And it was the funniest thing. She sat there like this with her legs, you know, crossed like this, knitting in the dressing room, and here he was, right next to her, twiddling his thumb, just like, it was the funniest things. We all laughed about that. But anyway, getting back to the conducting thing, you know, and some of that maestro thing, you know, you learn a lot about conducting and the profession of conducting by watching others, and there are such things in life as good, bad examples, you know. Don't if you ever get to be a conductor, you ever get to be a dad, don't imitate that dad. You know, you can identify with that. We've seen all kinds of examples of people you don't want to emulate. Right. And in conducting, it's the same way too. Don't be that way. I played the bassoon in the Toledo Symphony for a conductor. Gosh, this was 30 years ago now, at least 30 years ago, who demanded that you call him maestro. This is probably where this revulsion of the maestro thing comes from. Demand that you call him maestro, who would insist on conducting rehearsals from memory, no score in front of him. Just
his memory?
His memory, yeah, no score in front of him, and make mistakes all over the place.
He was making mistakes.
He was making mistakes, and then he'd stop and yell at you if you didn't come in when he thought you were supposed to, but it was the wrong place. It was his mistake, and it's all this kind of nonsense, and you know. And I thought, geez, Louise, is that what it really is all about? I don't think so. And would do all kinds of extraneous gestures on the podium just to look impressive and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, getting back to the video here, everything you see the conductor do is. Some conductors are that way. They'll make the gestures. Everything I do, I try to elicit a response, not from the crowd. If that happens, fine. That's a byproduct. It's to elicit a certain kind of response from the players and/or singers at any one given moment in the concert. You know, if I can, by the flip of a wrist or just something extra that I can do physically, can create a little bit different sound than they may have given me otherwise. That's kind of my role, and so some of it you have to kind kind of be a play actor a little bit, catch them by surprise just a bit. And you have to do it before the sound happens. It's too late. Once you've cued and they're already playing, you can't affect the sound, you know. So it's always, you see a lot happening right before the beat happening. We call that the impulse of will. That's actually a conductorial term, the impulse of will.
You are imposing your will on them, or at least guiding them with, as to what you're looking for.
Right, and if they don't want to go along with it, I still do have the checkbook at the end of the concert. So that's where that other role comes back. No, I joke about that. That's not even true. You know, I have to say this orchestra, and I've conducted lots of orchestras around, and we'll get into that in a second. But we've worked very, very hard over the last almost 20 years now since I started here, to get a group of people in the room that love the music making for the sake of being there. They want to be there, and that's not always been the case here. We had to go through an awful lot of weeding out of certain folks that, you know, just wanted to put in the time, didn't want to practice. Right. You go through the whole list of those types of behaviors. But I think we have an orchestra and a chorus now that just love it, and I hope that's sort of a reflection of
your passion has come through.
And every conductor has a different style. You know, there are certain ones that are much more of the dictatorial. I'm very jovial on the podium. That doesn't mean I don't get demanding when it's required, but I don't know how you make music and make an artistic expression if you don't have a certain amount of, you know, affection for the art itself, and a real need to, not a need, but boy, I'm glad we're here together doing this.
There's
together,
an emotional involvement.
There's emotional involvement.
Say like you said, if it's a dictatorship, then you're just doing what you're told. Versus, because you're trying to evoke emotion from the orchestra. Orchestra is trying to evoke emotion from the audience.
That's right. And I try to give them the respect that they deserve too, and then it comes back to me 100-fold that way. You know, you respect the players. You know, give them all the tools that they need. Give them their music ahead of time. You know, talk to them like they're professionals, like the professional people that they are. Right. They return that 100-fold.
You touched briefly on the Mozart Festival. This is something we need to talk about, that not everybody is aware of what the Mozart Festival is, or how, like the symphony itself, is so unique to this area.
Well, let me jump back, because I jumped away on something. I started talking about Jerry Faust and everything. I got off on a tangent and everything. This is not how my rehearsals go. I tend not to go on tangents. But you know, when I was working down there in Cincinnati and having this love for conducting and everything,
we were talking about Blue Ash.
Right. In 1985, I decided, this was like my second, was my first. No, 1983, my first Christmas at All Saints. I hired a harp player and a flute player to play, and the harpist showed up late for midnight mass at Christmas, and I wound up having to fire her just before mass started.
On Christmas Eve.
On Christmas Eve, and she had an attitude. I mean, the whole thing was just terrible, and I had to make a decision. Boom, and I was just 28 years old at that point in time. My first firing. You know, so, but my choir came through with such passion and emotion as a result of that. I said, what can we learn from this, right? You know, so who knows? You know, I went home, and as directors do, you have a lot of adrenaline flowing. You don't go to bed right away. Your head is still spinning. I flipped on a movie with John Houseman, where he is a retired music director, and somebody engages him to be a church choir director, and they're working on Handel's Messiah. And this is like 2 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day, back in 1983. And I said, maybe I need to do something like that. You know, maybe this is a reason I'm watching this. And so the next choir practice we had, you know, which was a week later or so, because I gave them the week off from Christmas and everything, I said, here's what we're going to do. In 2 years, we're going to do Handel's Messiah here with orchestra. And I told them about the movie and everything. And I said, we're going to take 2 years to learn this. It's a very difficult piece, 2 years. But in 2 years, we will do that. And as a result, though, we went from a choir of 22 to 62.
Wow.
Because we used that as a vehicle to build.
Yeah.
And in the process, the parish got themselves a pretty wonderful volunteer church choir in the process. And we began working hard and started raising the money for it and everything, and put on that concert to a packed church. And there was some notoriety in the Cincinnati Enquirer about it and everything. And from there I said, well, now what's next? And so knew some folks there in the parish that were in public relations and so forth. And I said, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Bride, Joe Bride and Associates, still exists down in Cincinnati. It's a PR firm. I said, Joe, what do you think of starting a symphony orchestra here in Montgomery? And he said, well, that's a great idea, Paul, but if you're going to start a symphony orchestra, start it in Blue Ash. Montgomery is a lot of homes and everything, but Blue Ash is the place for business. You know, there are tons of businesses there, and they seem to have an interest in the arts. You know, from all their plans and everything. I said, okay, fine. So from there, I said, well, what do we do now? He says, well, we ought to get Blue Ash, the city of Blue Ash, involved. So I went to city council. I said, here's what I want to do. I don't want any money from you guys, which, thank God.
Okay, now we're relaxed.
All I want is
talk.
Just give me a letter of endorsement for the idea. You know, and so they passed a resolution. I got my letter, and I took the letter, and we assembled a board of directors and held our first board meeting. One of those first board members was a gentleman by the name of Dean Butler. That you say, well, who's Dean Butler? You know him because he started a little firm called Lens Crafters.
Okay.
And at that time in Blue Ash, they were on one floor of one office building. That's all of Lens Crafters, their offices. They had some locations around Cincinnati. Well, you know what they are now, right? Huge firm. And my first meeting with him went very, very well. We were both about the same age. He's just a young guy in his 30s at the time. He says, well, what do you need? I said, well, frankly, we need money. He says, what do you need, Paul? And he opens up his drawer and pulls out his checkbook. He said, well, $5,000 help? I said, sure. You know, so he writes me a check, and away we go.
So you started with the board and fundraising before you went around and started looking for,
right.
I need a violinist,
I
need a cello, I need a...
As I said before, if you find the avenue, the money, the venue and so forth, the musicians will come. The worst thing you can have is just a room full of musicians sitting around trying to be board members. And we had that experience here, didn't we? In the early years, my first board meetings here, Dave will tell you about this. Actually, this is before you got on the board, I think. My very first board meetings, there's a viola player and a bassoon player, and and they sat around talking about Bach. I said, well, geez, guys, we got to raise some money here.
Okay. We can talk about Bach.
Bach is dead. His checkbook is gone. Okay. But I learned that in Blue Ash, and at the time we had getting back to the Blue Ash thing, we took 2 years to organize that orchestra. 1987, played our first concert on the 4th of July weekend there as part of the dedication of their square with the Uptown Blue Ash, which is still a beautiful venue. In fact, they built that stage there with us in mind and consulted with us and everything. And they recorded the concert, and that on Thanksgiving Day, that recording was played over WGUC. Peggy Schmidt, who was an on-air talent there at WGUC, was at the concert. She says, "You guys are fantastic." And I just listened to the recording. Rob Ryder was my sound man, I didn't even know he was recording the concert at the time.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I had no idea.
Wow.
So it was on, and I still got that recording. So the Blue Ash Symphony was birthed out of those longings on my part to conduct, and you say, well, these musicians that are around town and they kind of get out in the real world and then they realize and they go do something else. If you kind of wait for life to happen to you, life's going to happen to you, but somebody else is going to be making the decisions. And I guess I had an entrepreneurial spirit right from the very beginning that, you got to make things happen for yourself. In Europe, it's not this way at all. They have a state-supported system in so many of the countries where you become a pianist and you get a job with an opera company and you're a coach for the singers. You teach them their notes, which is kind of a strange thing to me. Learn your own notes or things. But anyway, that's how you become a conductor, and it's all state-supported. And you move up through the ranks.
There's a track that you follow.
In America, it's not that way at all. And I think this is a much healthier way. Because by God, if you're a conductor and you can make it in this country, it's because you've earned the right to stand on the podium and do that. And I feel that's kind of been my calling here, is to be sort of a Pied Piper. Started an orchestra in Blue Ash. Got a call from Rita Line here that the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony was having a concert, and Bill Steinort had just retired. He was on the faculty at Wright State, is that right? Wright State was their conductor at that time, and he moved to Hawaii, and they were conductorless for the Tillman concert of 1995. Would I mind coming up and just conducting that concert? I said, well, I would love to come up and conduct the concert, but I tell you what, you know, I mean, if you're offering me the job as conductor here, it's not going to be one concert a year. You know, I just can't see making the effort to do one concert and going back home. And I said, we got to figure out some other things to do. So that's when I met Dave Ballou. We had lunch at the City Club across the street and started talking about plans immediately. So we had that first Tillman concert. Brian Wallach and Angela Satras, young violinists that knew Brian, were our featured soloists. And we got done with that almost immediately. I said to Dave, I said, well, what else are we going to do? You know, we got to do something else. So from there, the Picnic and Pops were born, which we started to play. I think the very first ones were at the Ice Arena, weren't they, Dave? Yeah. Across from the Hamilton campus, right? Here or the Miami campus in Hamilton. And then almost immediately after that, I said, you know what, Dave, I think we need a Mozart festival here. You know. And at that point in time,
Dave, did you ever ask why? What made you think of that?
No, I don't let Dave ask those questions. Like why? So, you know, and at that first year, I just met my lovely wife Pat a couple of years before that, and that first year of the Mozart Festival coincided with our first anniversary. So it was 1997, first Mozart Festival. We were married in 1996. And it was one weekend, it was one concert, and we stayed at the then Hamiltonian Hotel for our anniversary, you know, and walked across the square. It was at St. Julie Billiart, the concert was and everything. And she said, well, if you're going to make this a festival, you got to do more than one concert. You got to do some fun stuff too. I said, well, wait a minute, the concerts should be fun too. So she started organizing all these historic walks in German Village and in Rossville and other things up at Pyramid Hill. There were tours there of I think you were working at Pyramid Hill at that point in time, in the late 90s, right?
Yeah, I gave the tours.
Yep. and just all kinds of things to turn into, and now it's an 8-day long octave of Mozart, we call it, and we call it the Ohio Mozart Festival now because we have people coming in from all over the Midwest, and we're still, even to this day, it's still the only Mozart festival in the Midwest. To find another one to the west of us, you have to go all the way to Oklahoma.
Really?
There's a very distinguished festival there. They call it the OK Mozart Festival, not Oklahoma Mozart.
It's just the OK Mozart Festival.
And to find another one going east, you have to go all the way to Lincoln Center, which is a pretty distinguished place in New York City, you know. Other than that, Hamilton, Ohio. So we feel very, very good about that.
And very unique. Let's talk about another concert.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about this one. Now, by the time this airs on TV Hamilton, this concert would have already taken place, but we want to promote it because we want you to be there, but also because this, as you said, this is probably the biggest concert or events that you've been able to put together, the Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony so far.
Right. That's right. Well, as I said, we've been around for 60 years, started in 1951. This is by far the most ambitious undertaking we've done. Ronan Tynan is famous for he's famous for a lot of reasons, but Ronan is one of the 3 original Irish tenors that traveled the world. But he's probably the most famous of the 3, and they've all split up now, and they have solo careers, and his is just, you know, it circles the globe, not only as a singer, but he also is an inspirational teacher and public speaker and so forth. Quite a story. He was born with 2 deformed limbs, which resulted in him having eventually both legs amputated, being fit with prosthetics. But you know, you talk about another entrepreneurial spirit that never held him down. Grew up on a farm outside of Dublin, where he and his father would go out and milk the cows in the morning and sing to them, which is where he learned to sing. He said his dad had a lovely tenor voice.
Ah, yes.
Not loud at all like mine, but a lovely tenor voice, and he got that beautiful head tone of his as a result. Sang in boys' choirs too, and they noticed right away with this young boy with the 2 prosthetic limbs had a great voice, so he'd get these solos and so forth, singing at Mass. But he went off to college and was so inspired by the treatment that he got from the doctors when they did the amputation work and his rehab work and so forth, that he became an orthopedic man. He's a board-certified physician in Ireland right now. Yes. In addition to being probably the greatest tenor voice in the world today,
I'm familiar with the voice. I'm familiar with the story of getting over his limbs and amputations. I hadn't heard that he's also an orthopedic.
Yeah, board certified. In fact, one of the things that he does now is he was engaged over a year ago as visiting professor of voice at the University of Kentucky. And it was through Ronan that I got to know the opera director there, Everett McCorvey, and we were able to bring in those wonderful singers we just had for the Mozart Festival this past year. Weren't they great? Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to keep that collaboration going, so you'll hear more of those kids. But what a great find. You know, I mentioned CCM before, and for years it was just not necessary to even look past the Ohio River for talent. You know, why bother? You got CCM right there.
Right.
So Ronan put me in touch with them, and he said, Paul, the talent here is stunning. It's unbelievable. I went down in the fall. He's visiting professor of voice there, of opera, and what was supposed to be a 40-minute lunch, just talk, get to know you sort of thing, get some questions answered and that kind of thing, turned into 2.5 hours, 99% of which was him talking to me. and it's going to be fun because he's got this lovely Irish accent, and I have one as well, and I don't feel at all ill at ease using it with him, because as he's sitting there talking to me, he's also using his Kentucky accent, talking just like this. Well, that's just fine, Mr. Tyne. You know, and he's talking to the waitresses this way, and I said, all right, all the holds are off, all the holds, no holds barred. When I get you on stage, I'm using the Irish.
We're having fun with this.
Pat won a trip to Ireland a couple of years ago, and so we were able to go, and I've always fancied myself as sort of a fake accent guy. I can do French and Italian, all that, but Irish is my favorite one, so I started using this Irish accent
in the
shops and things.
Yeah.
And the worst thing she could have done, our tour director, she says, Marion Kelly, her name was, my Lord Paul, you have a wonderful accent. You sound just like one of the locals. It's the worst thing she could have said to me, because from that point on the trip, must be that musical ear you have after all. So I would use that when I go into shops. And so I'm standing in line in these souvenir shops and everything, and the people in front of me and behind me are obviously tourists right along with me, you know. And so the shopkeeper's talking very slowly and distinctly for them. Okay. And I walk up and I use my Irish accent, and they just, I took it as a supreme compliment that they thought I was Irish enough that they could use me. I could use me. But anyway, Ronan will be here. Now the story between why we'll have Ronan here is again my wife's fault, because we're sitting there on St. Patrick's Day, her namesake after all, Patricia, you know. Okay. St. Patrick's Day, and we're watching television. We're down in the basement in the family room, and WCET is having their pledge drive on, you know. And one of the things that they love to do is show him singing, because all the Irish tenor lovers in town call up. They make pledges and stuff. So he's on all the time when they try to raise money. And I thought, well, that's probably a good thing, you know. She says, you ought to do an Irish tenors concert. I said, all three of them? She says, yeah. I said, oh man, you have no idea how expensive. She goes, well, fine, just bring in one. Just like that. I said, all right, which one do you want? You know, just smart aleck I am.
Right.
Well, that tall one with the bald head. Okay, that's Ronan Tynan. So I'm sitting there at the computer, and I'm clicking around, and I said, oh, let's look him up. He's got a website. So I click on the website, and there it is, you know, his whole life story, and there's a little button at the top, contact us. So I do. I write him an email right then and there on St. Patrick as he's singing on the television. Send it off. Well, you know, what the heck.
Right.
Well, the next day at the office, the phone rings, and this is Ronan Tynan's management calling from Dublin, Ireland. Is Paul Stanbery there? We just got an email from you, you know, talking all about, you're kidding me, you know. Well, it turns out he was in between management. He had a manager which he fired, and then he's since that time signed up with another one. but he's in between
So he answered his own email.
Yes, it was his voice on the line, and I caught him in a lie by the end of the conversation and everything, you know. that you know, I mean, it wasn't a big lie, but I knew that was you, you know, talking.
Oh, right.
We were floating the fees. Well, how about this much? Oh, I don't think I can come. I mean, I don't think he can come for that much. So anyway, we lined it up. And first we wanted to bring him in on St. Patrick's Day, and he said, Paul, listen, everybody wants an Irish tenor on St. Patrick's Day, but you know what the Irish want to be doing on St. Patrick's Day? It's not listening to me saying they're going to be in the bar drinking, you know. So we came up with this other date, and as it turns out, there's nothing else going on in town. I mean, I called the opera, the symphony, the pops, I called the Phrase Pavilion, the Aeronaut, you name it, I called it, and nothing on this weekend.
Oh, you're free and clear.
Yeah, and so I said, well, I'll tell you what, put a little sticky note at the top that we're bringing in Ronan Tynan on the 22nd of June. So the tickets, as you say, this will be aired by the time the concert will be history. But it stands.
But everybody here,
it stands to be just an outstanding evening. And if you like Irish tenor stuff, he's given us a whole lot of. I won't tell you what he's going to sing, but some Irish tunes I've never heard of before. I can't wait to hear what he does with them. And of course, O Danny Boy as well, which he's going to dedicate to our good friend Bill Bohm, who at the very onset of this whole question of whether we could bring in this distinguished gentleman, I called Bill and I said, here's what I want to do, but I need a certain amount of money, seed money. Right. Would you be interested? And Bill started and ran Connector Manufacturing for a number of years, was CEO and chairman of the board, just passed away a couple of months ago from bone cancer. And so he won't even be at the concert. His wife is coming, though. Renee is coming to the concert, as well as a bunch of the brass from Connector. But Ronan will dedicate "O Danny Boy" specifically to Bill at the concert. And I kind of knew Bill would go for the idea because he always fancied himself an Irish tenor anyway. Okay. You know, and I just thought the old frustrated musician singer. Well, plus, you know, Ronan sang for Ronald Reagan's funeral, and Bill and I shared a love of Ronald Reagan. So I knew that the story is interesting about that. I knew that would be appealing to Mr. Bohm as well. But Ronan's mother had Alzheimer's and died of it. And as a result of all of that, Ronan became involved with the International Alzheimer's Support Society. Yeah. I'm not sure what their title is, but there's a group. And of course, Ronald Reagan suffered and died from that as well at the age of 93. And so as a result, they would attend these international meetings, and he got to know Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan too, you know. And so for years, until he died, Nancy would send Ronan a Christmas gift of a book that the president would autograph and sign to him. Even in his Alzheimer's state, he would do that. And he says he just cherishes those books. And so when the time came, he got a call from Mrs. Reagan, and she said, Ronnie has died. But one of his last requests was that you find an Irish tenor with a voice big enough to fill the National Cathedral for my funeral. Can you do that? And she said, Ronan, can you do that for us? And he said, I'd be honored. Wow. And so you can now go on the internet, and there's a video. In fact, we have it on our website too, of him singing, and there's the president's casket there, and all the the world dignitaries and Mrs. Reagan, and here's Ronan Tynan singing. And he has, along those lines, also I think he's famous for one of the Star Spangled Banner renditions. Oh yeah, the 9/11 memorial right away. The New York City firefighters asked him to come and sing for the very first memorial service for that. Very, very powerful. So everybody has that on their calendar, right? Yep. Okay. By the way, we have flyers at the back here on that little table. So if you want to just take a bunch of them, give them to your friends. That's what he does. It's promotion too. It's not just standing there with the baton. It's promotion. Got to make it happen. The entrepreneur. It's not a concert unless there's an audience. Right. Speaking of an audience, we could keep going, but I do want to open it up to questions. Yes, ma'am. Are you going to play at that new amphitheater when it opens? Eventually, yes. Oh, thank God. Yes. In fact, I was.
I'm sorry. The question is, if you're going to play in the new amphitheater, we're
Yes.
talking the one down by the river.
River's Edge.
River's Edge.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I was consulted on the stage layout and so forth, just to make sure that it was big enough for the symphony.
And it was facing the right direction.
Facing the right direction. Yeah.
Instead of the sun beating down right in your face.
Do you have a favorite conductor?
Wow. Me? No. You know, I was really...
He's the one in front of the mirror. Yes, that's the one.
I guess of all the ones that I've worked with, Robert Shaw probably is my... Just not because he was actually a very large man, and was not very, shall we say, athletic on the podium. But boy, did he bring weight and gravitas to any occasion. I was for a while the assistant conductor of the May Festival Chorus, and when he would come to town, the adrenaline level in the room would just go sky high. Huh. And I can remember this one time, you know, I had idolized his music making for years, but before I say this, just the deep spirituality that he brings, that would bring to every score. It was almost like you were in church, and he would treat a Beethoven symphony or some great mass of Mozart or Berlioz or something in the same way. There are deeply spiritual aspects to the notes themselves, which he would bring out, you know. And some of his musicians were a little mystified by it, but I just, you know, I've got a background in church music, so I was used to preachers and people preaching to me and so forth. And his father was a Presbyterian minister out in California. But the funny story was, you know, here I am, the assistant conductor of the May Festival Chorus, and Mr. Porco, my good friend Bob Porco, the conductor, had to be away on this one particular evening, and we were preparing chorus for Robert Shaw. I said, Paul, would you mind? I got to be away, and you know, just warm the chorus up a little bit, and so that when Mr. Shaw gets here, he'll be. Well, I knew he was in the building, but I didn't know where he was. You know, and I had seen pictures of him, never met him before. So here I am warming up the chorus and kind of rehearsing a couple of things and everything, and I'm standing here with the wall to my back, and the chorus is here, but the hallway is behind us, and there's a doorway over here. And so nobody in the chorus can see the doorway, but I could because I'm on the podium. And all of a sudden this large hulking figure comes into the doorway and just stands there. And I'm thinking, well, I wonder who that is. And it dawns on me, oh my gosh, I bet that's Robert Shaw. And so I keep on conducting, well, maybe it isn't, you know, maybe it isn't. Well, the figure starts walking into the room slowly. Didn't want to interrupt me, you know. That's respect of one conductor to another, which is very nice. Gets all the way over here, and I go, oh crap, it is Robert Shaw. And my right leg involuntarily starts to shake like this.
Really?
Just all by itself. It wasn't even in tempo, you know, just keeps on shaking and everything. And he starts walking up this way. By this time, the chorus can see him and everything are all kind of Twitter-pated, you know.
Right.
And I said, oh, geez, what the heck? I said, oh, Mr. Shaw, good evening. And I start to hand him my baton. I said, would you like to just take over? He says, no, you're doing just fine. Keep on going. I said, well, thank you very much. I thought that was a great endorsement. But, you know, just the warmest, most spiritual experiences were under his baton, and some of the most mind-blowing performances, and just extremely meticulous about every little detail. That was his thing, his attention to the details within the score. No individual note was left to chance. And by God, you better play and sing the rhythms exactly as the composer wrote them. Not subject to your own personal whim or interpretation. Yeah. So I just really loved his conducting.
Interesting.
You know.
Interesting. Dave?
I call Paul a music man because things have changed tremendously since he came to Hamilton in 1995. This man has changed the cultural and musical landscape of Hamilton. He wears many hats. He hadn't talked about the chorale, which I hope he will in a minute, in a great Miami Youth Symphony. The chorale is something Paul did for 2 years and said, we had the Mozart Festival. Now we need a chorale.
Right.
And about 6 weeks later,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave. The question was about the chorale, and that first Mozart Festival in 1995. A good 50% at least of Mozart's music involves singing. It's been said that when Mozart would write pieces for the violin to play, he always had a soloist, a singer in mind, because there's a very vocal quality to all of his melodies, you know. So as a consequence, we were going to be not just playing the orchestra parts, obviously. We're going to do some of his choral orchestral music as well. So we needed a chorus, and we had our first rehearsals at Trinity Church over here, and which I think Dave lined up for us. And Dave's a lifetime member of Trinity, of course, and started out with a chorus of 22 that year. It's kind of funny. That's the same number that I had in my church choir down in Cincinnati when we started. But now we have over 90 on the roster. But we did that first Mozart Festival with 22 singers, and
put them through their paces.
Yes, and you saw a good example of them with the Verdi Requiem excerpt we just played for you. And the Great Miami Youth Symphony actually was a function of the Fitton Center, which was started by Brian Schweikert, my good friend who taught at Fairfield High School for a number of years as the orchestra director there. Started this youth orchestra at the Fitton Center just to have more experiences for the kids locally, so they didn't have to travel all the way down into Cincinnati to play with kids from other schools. And at some point when his kids got to be a certain age, he needed to be home. He said, "Paul, would you like to take this over?" I said, "Sure." That would have been about like 1998 or 9 or so. So fairly early in my tenure here since '95. But it is a youth orchestra that is a full symphony orchestra, strings, woodwind, brass, percussion. We have about 10 different school districts represented. Every kid has to try out every year. Mm-hmm. There's no guarantee you're going to be in it again the following year just because you were in one year. That's the most fair way to do that, you know. So doing a fair amount of recruiting for that actually just right now here at the end of the school year. But a couple of years ago, we were able to assume responsibility and guidance and quote-unquote ownership of the youth orchestras from the Fitton Center. Now it's under the wing of the symphony, so it's our official youth orchestra.
Did not know that.
And yes, and we rehearse at Wilson Middle School here, right next to the hospital. Mm-hmm. Brown Dawson Flick is our corporate sponsor for the last 2 years now, right. and it's a wonderful, wonderful symphony orchestra. We meet on Monday nights at Wilson. We play 3 concerts a year, and it just costs the kids $100 a year to be a part of. And even at that, if there's financial concern, we have some scholarship money available to waive the fee, thanks to Brown Dawson Flick. So it's just a great opportunity. And it's a great and for example, the kids that go to the Lakota schools have no string program in the Lakota schools. You know, they have wonderful bands and wonderful courses, but no strings. So this is a chance for those kids who are in those bands, for example, to play with strings, so feel what that feels like. What's it feel like to play in a symphony orchestra? And also, kids that play a string instrument, it's a place for them to play. We have a fair amount of kids from Hamilton and Fairfield and Talawanda and the Lakota schools that take part, but we have kids that come all the way down from Dayton. We've had this past year, our first bassoonist was from Indiana. Really? We've had kids from Kentucky.
Again, this is one of those things that you don't realize what you have in your own backyard. Yeah. And so many people maybe not be aware of.
Yeah, right. In addition to that, we have 4 scholarship programs. Speaking of young people, that for young people that need a little bit of help in their music making, we've got it available, and that's a good thing that TV Hamilton can help us get the word out too. And all of this, of course, you can find out more about going to our website, hfso.org, or just call us.
Yeah, HFSO, Hamilton-Fairfield Symphony Orchestra.
Right, .org, hfso.org, or 895-5151. We were started in 1951, so that's where we get the phone number from, 5151. But anyway, we have the Jack and Audrey Confer scholarships, which are 10 $100 awards, and that's for kids and they're need-based, who need a little bit of help hooking up with a music teacher, private teacher on their instrument. And we don't make the check out to the child, so they don't take the money and go spend it at McDonald's or someplace, you know. We write the check out to the teacher. They have to name the teacher, we'll mail it to the teacher, then it's up to the child to contact the teacher and set those lessons up. And then before he died, Dr. Ed Keyser put a fair amount of money in an account with the Hamilton Community Foundation to sponsor the Keyser Awards. Now for those are two $1,200 awards, or yes, two $1,200 awards, which are given to children within the youth orchestra. You have to be part of the youth orchestra first to be eligible, but you audition and you have a little interview, and those awards are major awards, and they're meant to be spent, you know, on your further development. You know,
right.
You're a serious young musician, you want to go to college, you want to go to a music camp in the summer, has to be spent on something like that. In addition to that, then Dave and Marge put up a $1,000 award for a young artist to be a soloist with the professional symphony orchestra backing them up. So that's
that
our
would be
young artist competition.
Yeah.
And those are for kids that live in Butler County as well. They have to audition. Those are about to happen actually here in June.
What a thrill. What a thrill.
And then brand new to us this year, on the 28th of June, we're going to have the first round of auditions for the HFSO Guild Voice Award. It's a brand new thing for a young singer who wants to become serious in the realm of opera and or musical theater. And those will be held at the Fitton Center. And again, you just call the phone number for more information about that, or the website as well. In addition to that, Henry Seplik, who is our good friend and does all kinds of work theatrically here in town, added $500 to that award. So now we have a second place. We have $1,000 and a $500 award to give out in voice.
That makes a difference in someone's being able to pursue something. Just that much, be able to make something happen.
And I have to say too, Sean, this just not to brag, but there are lots of larger organizations that don't do anything like this. I mean, for example, you don't. Can anyone say what the Cincinnati Symphony gives out in scholarships? They don't.
Really?
There are no scholarships available. So here we are at our size of organization.
What an organization.
We're doing 4 things for the kids here. So thanks to the TV Hamilton to help get that word out for us.
That's wonderful. Any other questions, comments? Auditions, anyone?
Yep.
Well, we thank you for joining us this evening. Paul, thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
I've enjoyed it. There's so much more we could do, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
Thanks for fighting the crowds.
Yeah.